Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Buhari and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome everyone to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Buhari.
And I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
We want to thank you guys, as always, for joining us. We've got a lot of boxing to discuss, so let's jump right into the PBC Fight of the Week. This Saturday at Brooklyn's Barclays Center, two-division world champ Danny "Swift" Garcia takes on Jose Benavidez Jr. atop a triple header on Showtime. Now, the Showtime Championship card begins at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and we begin here with the essentials.
Okay, here we go. Danny Garcia, 36-3 with 21 knockouts. Benavidez, 27-1-1 with 18. Garcia's 3-2 in his last 5 with 2 knockouts. The two losses came against Porter and Spence, Sean Porter and Errol Spence. Benavidez 3-1-1 with 2 knockouts. Garcia's last fight was against Spence, lost a unanimous decision on December 5th. Benavidez' last fight was a majority draw with Francisco Torres on November 13th. Garcia has a 54% knockout ratio. Benavidez 62. Garcia has fought 270 rounds. Benavidez 145. Garcia's 34. Benavidez 30. Garcia turned pro back in 2007, Benavidez 2010. They both fight from an orthodox stance. Garcia's 5'8", Benavidez 5'10.5". Garcia has a 68.5 inch reach. Benavidez 71, so he's got an edge there. Garcia is from Philly, as we know, and Benavidez lives in Washington State, but he is from Phoenix, Arizona.
Mike, let's start with Danny Garcia. I mean, this is his first fight since December 2020 when he lost the decision to Errol Spence Jr. This is also his 154-pound debut. Give us your thoughts on where Garcia is at presently.
Well, first, I've always thought of Danny Garcia as a winner, a guy who finds a way to have his hand raised. His only losses have come against elite guys at 147, but he was always competitive, although the loss to Spence was a clear loss. He did win a title at 147 and was unbeaten at 140, where I think he was at his best. He has a good amateur foundation, meaning he can box. He's an excellent counterpuncher, one of the best in the game, I think. He has power. And as you've said, I think he's got one of the best chins in the sport. He's just been a consistently good all-around fighter at an elite level for a decade plus. And maybe he's not in his prime right now, but I haven't seen signs that the guy's slowed down. So I think he's still a really, really good fighter.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out soon enough. How about Jose Benavidez Jr.? He ended a 3-year layoff last November, fought Francisco Torres to a 10-round majority draw. What's your take on where he's at in his career?
Well, again, generally, Benavidez is a clever boxer, a solid puncher, an incredibly tough guy. He was shot in the leg in 2016, which seemed to end his career. A year and a half later, the guy's back in the ring. I don't think he's been quite the same since that incident, but he's been able to compete at a high level. For example, he lost on the cards and was stopped in the final round against Terrence Crawford. But I thought he gave a spirited performance in that fight. I thought he was competitive most of the fight, which surprised me and a lot of people. He hasn't been very active, to answer your question directly. He hasn't been very active, so maybe he's a bit of a question mark. But when he fights, he comes to fight.
Yeah, I agree with you, particularly on the Crawford fight. That was really surprising. Now, in his last fight last November, he weighed nearly 159 pounds. He's also 5'11". Is Benavidez just too big for Garcia?
Well, let's put it this way. This is a legitimate question about Garcia at 154. As I said, I think he was at his best at 140. He was good at 47, damn good at 47, but maybe not as physically imposing as he was at the lower weight. Now he's fighting at 154. Will he carry his power up to the weight? Will his chin be as strong against junior middleweights? These are legitimate questions. To answer your question directly, no, I don't think Benavidez is going to be too big for Garcia. Benavidez told me he walks around at like 170, between 170 and 180. I'm guessing that Danny also walks around in that range, although he likes to eat him. Might actually be even a little bit more.
Yeah, that's true. What does Garcia need to do in order to win?
I think he's got to be patient. Some guys like to try to make statements in their debuts in a new weight or a comeback fight, something like that. And sometimes that backfires. I think that's what happened to Benavidez in his last fight. He tried too hard to knock out Torres and ended up with a draw. I think Garcia needs to let the fight come to him, use his skill set, counter punch with purpose, meaning throw hard combinations, not just one punch at a time. I think he still has the power to do damage at 154. He might be able to break down Benavidez if he's methodical.
Yeah, well, yeah, methodical. I also think he does need to throw more, but or perhaps be more efficient. I should say I don't think he would want to wait around against Benavidez. What does Benavidez need to do in order to win?
I think he needs to use his jab and be mindful of what's coming back at him. I think a long, pesky jab could keep Garcia off balance, make it difficult for him to counter. And it could set up the jab could set up power shots for Benavidez, who also needs to throw punches in combinations. Again, though, Garcia is a really, really good counter puncher. Benavidez needs to be careful, or he could get hurt. He has to fight really smart in this fight.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's about that time. Let's get your prediction in. How do you see the fight playing out?
I think Garcia is going to do what he needs to do to win. He's going to box intelligently and patiently and gradually wear down Benavidez. Benavidez is too good to not be competitive, but I don't think he's going to hurt Garcia, which might be what it would take to beat him. So I'm going to say Garcia by unanimous decision or late stoppage in a competitive fight.
I like Garcia as well, but I think it's going to be much, much closer. In fact, I would not be surprised if Benavidez pulled this off. I just can't bring myself to pick him. I'm picking Garcia by close decision here. I think that Benavidez is shaking the rust off. He's coming back down to 154. And I tell you what, as you said, he gave Terence Crawford a pretty good fight before he was stopped. Yeah. And much of his success was due to his size and that long jab. I think Garcia is going to feel the inactivity early on, and he's going to struggle to get his timing, which will allow Benavidez to build an early lead and make things very, very difficult. And I don't know how Garcia is going to respond, but I'm going to lean toward him finding a way to eke out a victory in a fight that maybe, could go either way. Now, in the co-feature, another really good matchup. Adam Konofsky takes on Ali Demirenzen in 10-round heavyweight action. Mike, Konofsky's coming off back-to-back stoppage losses. How important is this fight for him?
That's about as important as it gets. He's coming off back-to-back knockout losses, albeit to an elite heavyweight in Robert Helenius. He certainly cannot afford another setback. He can't afford three losses in a row. I think it would be extremely difficult to climb back from that. And he knows how important this is. I think he's ready for this fight. Most importantly, I think he worked on his defensive deficiencies and has said in so many words that he won't be fighting as recklessly as he has in the past, which cost him in the fights against Helenius. We'll see how he looks.
Now, Demirenzen has won 5 in a row, including a surprise stoppage win over Gerald Washington in January. This is going to be his 3rd fight this year. What makes Demirenzen so dangerous?
I just think he's a pretty good all-around fighter. He was a 2006 Olympian. He's a good boxer. Watch his head moving. He's a clever boxer. I like his fighting spirit. I went back and watched his stoppage at Gerald Washington, and he just kept coming and coming until he broke Washington down and the fight was stopped. And he does have power, as most heavyweights do. So, what makes him dangerous? I would say a lot of things.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So, who are you picking?
Well, Kopnatski is who he is, an aggressive guy who tries to knock out his opponents. That's never going to change, at least not completely. I do think he's going to be a little bit more careful, though. He'll use his skills to work his way inside, unload those big shots, and I think he's going to end up taking Demirenzen out. As I said, Demirenzen has power, most heavyweights do again, but he doesn't have Helenius power. So I don't think he's going to hurt Kopnatski in the same way. So I'm going to say Kopnatski by 8th round knockout.
I like it because I like Demirenzen by stoppage here. Okay. I think he's more powerful. I think he's on a roll. I think he's peaking. I think it's going to be bombs away. And, those 2 stoppage losses have to be in Konofsky's mind somewhere. And
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that could be a factor here. I am going with Demarenzen by TKO.
I'm going to be leading in the standings after this week. This is good.
I wouldn't count your chickens just yet. We'll see. Now in the televised opener, 140-pound matchup, a classic battle between up and comer and veteran. You got the unbeaten Gary Antoine Russell taking on former 2-division champ Rancis Barthélemy. I think I know what you're going to say based on our past conversations, but give us your thoughts on Gary Antoine Russell.
Right. You know how I feel about Russell. I think he's has pound for pound potential. He has a good skill set coming from that family. I think he's a really clever boxer. He fights aggressively, but in a smart way. He has the natural gifts, the speed, the power. Obviously, he has the power with all those knockout in every one of his fights. And I love his fighting spirit. He's a warrior, this guy. So I think he has it all. I need to keep seeing it. Fight after fight, and as he moves up, to know for sure what this guy has.
Exactly. See him get tested a little bit. Barthélemy, what's your take on him?
He's no joke. He's one of those guys who cut his teeth in the Cuban amateur system, which we know produces excellent boxers. He's one of those guys. He's a 2-division professional title holder. He has victories over guys like Argenis Mendez, Antonio DeMarco, Dennis Shafakaz, Mickey Bay, Kirill Relic, and other guys that you've heard of. His problem is that he hasn't won a big fight in 5 years, and he's 37 years old. I'm not sure what he has left at this moment. He did look good in 2 comeback fights last year, but they were against second-tier guys. So we just have to wait and see. But the talent and the experience is there. There's no question about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mentioned earlier it's up-and-comer against veteran. What does a win here mean for each guy?
For Russell, it's another step toward a shot at the best in the division, which is what he wants. It's what they all want. I think if he wins this fight, the names of his opponents are going to get bigger and bigger as he goes forward. For Barthélemy, this might be kind of do or die. If he wins, suddenly he's a guy on the rise again. He'd be on track to get a title shot. If he loses, particularly if he loses badly, he could be more or less done.
So who are you picking?
I think a guy like Russell, a young, talented, powerful guy approaching his prime, is going to be too much for this version of Barthélemy. Barthélemy is too good to discount completely. I think he could frustrate Russell at times during the first half of the fight, but Russell's going to keep coming and wear Barthélemy down in the second half of the fight. And I think he'll keep the knockout streak alive. Although it could also, I could also see Barthélemy shifting into survival mode late in the fight and hearing the final bell. So that's a possibility. So I think he's going to be a late knockout. But if Barthélemy wants to survive, he could probably survive.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, this is his last stand. I think he's going to fight like it and give Russell the toughest fight of his career. Ultimately, I think Russell's work rate, I think his aggression is going to carry him to a decision win, and where he comes out a much better fighter for it. Reminder, we're both 29-6-1 in the prediction league. We will see how that changes this weekend.
Former 2-division world champion Danny Swift Garcia makes his long-anticipated return to the ring.
Danny Garcia!
Moving up to conquer a 3rd weight division. But the merciless Jose Benavidez Jr. hopes to pull off a career-defining win. It's a 154-pound Brooklyn brawl. Danny Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr. Live from Barclays Center, Brooklyn on Showtime.
It's time for Mike and I to go toe-to-toe. Now, in the spirit of the big fight Saturday night, the topic this week is Danny Garcia's greatest hits. Danny Garcia's 5 best fights. We'll go in ascending order, of course. So, Mike, kick it off.
Okay, so I pulled out a name from the past for my number 5, Kendall Holt, 2011. Now, I want to say that I was going back and forth between Holt and Nate Campbell. It could have actually been either one of them. I think people might forget how good they both were. They were really good, experienced, all-around fighters. I mean, I was around at that time, so I was watching these guys, and I was watching Danny come up. So I remember when Garcia beat Campbell and then Holt in consecutive junior welterweight fights in the same year. I thought, okay, this kid isn't just hype; he's the real thing. I think he proved it in those fights, to me anyway.
Yeah, he did.
And that's how things turned out for Garcia, who won his first title in his next fight.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about his 140-pound run. It really was unbelievable. You're pointing out these fights even before he won a title. He went through a gauntlet. I mean, they weren't gimme fights that he encountered on his way to a world title shot. 140 was a deep division, and Danny Garcia was in a lot of tough fights before and after his first world title there. My number 5 is his unanimous decision win over Robert Guerrero back in 2016. Where Garcia became a 2-division champion, winning the WBC 147-pound belt. And it's just one of my favorite performances because it was sort of like a last stand for Guerrero. He really gave it all he had in the early going, but I was so impressed by Garcia's performance. He was poised and he was methodical. He just broke Guerrero down, and by the late rounds, he was really doing a number on him. It says unanimous decision win, but I don't think that it really tells you. Well, he won by unanimous decision, but I don't think it really tells you the kind of performance he put on and how he broke down a bigger fighter, an experienced fighter in Robert Guerrero. Just one of my favorite Garcia performances. It was there that I was convinced like this, he is truly an elite level fighter, as if I didn't know before.
So maybe I should have prefaced, said something before my number 5 pick. So I tried to sort of de-emphasize titles. I was looking more at the opponent and where the opponent was, at that point in his career. So, I watched Guerrero come up from nothing to become a world champion. So I have mad respect for Guerrero. I just thought it was, like you said, it was kind of his last stand. So I just thought he was maybe a little bit too far past his prime compared to some of the other guys. I think he was still good, but a little bit past his prime. So I thought about
potentially.
He didn't quite make the list yet.
Yeah, potentially. I thought going in that he was past his prime, but his performance was,
tough son of a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. He brought it. He really brought it that night. Very impressive. So, let's go to number 4. I will kick this one off, and my number 4 is Zab Judah. This was the first fight I ever went to at Barclays Center, so another personal choice for me here. Zab, showed a lot of heart that night, something that, had been called into question regarding him, earlier in his career because, look, Garcia got off to a hot start. He was breaking Zab down, dropped him in the 8th round, and Zab got up and had, his best moments in the fight, really, really fought back and gave the Brooklyn crowd a lot to cheer about. Ultimately, he fell short, and Garcia had notched another big win, but it was a really, really good fight that I remember because I was there for it.
Yeah, you know what? If I had a number 6, Drew, he would have been number 6. He was one of the guys that I was really just racking my brain over, and I just decided it's kind of the same reason as the last one. I just decided that maybe he was a little bit more past it compared to some other guys, but come on, if you beat a guy with that kind of skill and that kind of experience, that's a solid win.
Yeah. Who's your number 4?
So my number 4 might seem kind of random in a way, but I think if you followed this guy when he was in his prime, you'd understand. Lamont Peterson, 2015. Peterson, people might also forget, was a hell of a fighter, and he was still in what I'd call the latter part of his prime when he and Garcia tangled at a catchweight of 143, which I had actually forgotten about, the catchweight. It was a really close competitive fight at a high level of skill, but Garcia won a majority decision in one of the toughest tests of his career. That was an example, and one of the reasons I included it, that was an example of Garcia finding a way to win a fight even against elite opposition, which he always did at 140 pounds.
Yeah, that fight did not make my list. And part of the reason is, I didn't score it, but I walked away feeling like Lamont Peterson won. I felt like, or maybe if it was a 15-rounder, it would have been a very clear decision for Lamont Peterson because he came on so strong in that fight. That said, Garcia, man, we discussed his chin earlier. He took some big shots in that. I don't know how he didn't even buckle. He kept a straight face.
Finds ways to win. Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. Really one of the most mentally tough fighters in the game. Let's go to number 3. Who you got?
Okay, I cheated. Blatantly cheated on number 3. So number 3 for me is Eric Morales 1 and 2.
Oh, Lord.
In 2012. So this way I could get an extra fight on my list. Obviously these fights are connected. Morales was beyond his prime and his ideal weight at the time, but he was still Eric Morales, and he held a major title going into the first fight, which turned out to be Garcia's first belt. Garcia outboxed and outworked Morales in the first fight to win a decision, and then stopped him in the fourth round in the rematch, which was the Hall of Famer's last fight, as it turned out. These victories to me were like a collective breakthrough for Garcia. I mean, those were just huge wins for him.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'll piggyback off of that because my number 3 is the rematch against Eric Morales. Now, Morales obviously was past it, but he was sort of rejuvenated. I mean, he had that really close fight with Marcos Maidana, and then the stoppage win over Pablo Cesar Cano, and he was looking like a good fighter at 140, a top fighter at 140. And in the first fight early on, he looked like that against Danny Garcia as well. And going into that fight, I mean, Danny Garcia was not the favorite going in. Morales was, again, looking like a reborn El Terrible. However, as you mentioned before, he just found a way and, figured Morales out, broke him down, had the knockdown late, and won a decision. And then in the rematch, my goodness, I mean, he just dominated from start to finish. I don't know really what Morales had left at that stage, but whatever he had, Garcia took it out of him. And obviously the highlight reel knockout where Morales did a 360 before he hit the canvas, trademark left hook, which we would see a lot more of going forward.
Yeah, I remember thinking after that second fight, wow, this is really a great young fighter.
Yeah, very special. Let's go to number 2. I'll kick this one off. My number 2 is Garcia's unanimous decision win over Lucas Matthysse back in 2013. Matthysse was sort of the boogeyman at 140 pounds. Knocked out Lamont Peterson in 3 and was on a big KO streak. Very impressive, and a lot of people were picking him to win, not only win, but to knock Danny Garcia out. Some people thought Danny Garcia was scared of him. I, for the record, was not one of them. I picked Garcia to win, and I was so impressed with his performance that night, boxing off his back foot and playing Matador to Matisse's bull, but landing some big shots too, scored the knockdown on Matthysse, and had to eat some big shots as well, but he ate them. And boxed his way to a decision victory over a very tough game, prime top fighter in Lucas Matthysse.
So by default, I'm giving away my number 1. So he's on my list, but I'm going to hold on before I talk about
Fair
it.
enough. Don't say anything then. Yeah. Who's your number 2?
My number 2 is Amir Khan. First, I was a big fan of the prime version of Amir Khan. Yeah. He always had that weak chin, but he was a super quick, skillful guy when he was at his best. And he was at his best when he faced Garcia. I think he was 8-1 since that knockout loss to Brytis Prescott. The only loss being a split decision against Lamont Peterson, who again I think is a really good fighter. And we know what happened. Garcia.
A lot of people thought Khan won that fight too.
Right. Which Lamont Peterson fight. Yeah, when Khan was at his best, he was so good. We know what happened in the Garcia fight, though. Garcia put Khan down 3 times and stopped him in the 4th round in one of Garcia's most dominating, memorable performances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll touch on that later. I think I just gave mine away as well. So let's go to number 1. I'll kick it off since you just discussed it. I'll just piggyback off what you said. My number 1 is against Amir Khan. That was extremely eye-opening. Khan got off to a hot start, and Danny was cut under a barrage of punches, it seemed like, those first couple rounds. And I remember, Angel really giving him the business in the corner. And Garcia came out in that round 3, and he just started unloading to Khan's body. And I was like, man, he's landing some really good body shots. And then sure enough, the big left hook upstairs that dropped Khan ultimately, stopping him. He wouldn't recover from that shot and was stopped a round later, the 4th round, which signaled, I think, Garcia's arrival on the big stage. It was such an impressive win, such a shocking win, that, from that point on, Danny Garcia was one of the more, gained that respect. And we knew that his left hook, which had flattened Eric Morales, was for real.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, it wasn't the best matchup for Amir Khan.
Seriously.
Danny's left hook is especially at 140 was a really big punch, and
his timing as well.
Yeah, and Khan just couldn't. You could, if you hit him just right, his legs turned into spaghetti. We saw it so many times.
Yeah, for sure. We know who you got for number one.
There was no suspense, unfortunately, for our number one picks. So yeah, I had Lucas Matisse. Matisse had suffered 2 disputed split decision losses to Zab Judah in 2010 and Devin Alexander the following year. 2 really good boxers. But he was still sort of a boogeyman at the time, which you said in so many words. Especially after he stopped Lamont Peterson in the fight before he faced Garcia. Matisse stopped all 6 of his opponents after the Alexander setback, which might be why he was a slight favorite to beat Garcia in that fight. Well, things didn't go well against Danny, who closed Matisse's eye, put him down, and as you said, won a unanimous decision and a victory that just left no doubt that Garcia was one of the best in the business.
Yeah, no question. I think after that, he started making appearances on Pound for Pound lists, and rightfully so. We'll see whether or not he can get back on those lists Saturday night again. He takes on Jose Benavidez Jr. At Brooklyn's Barclays Center on Showtime Championship Boxing. We can't wait for that. Obviously, we will discuss that and much more on the next episode of the PBC podcast.